Welcome to the last day of Holy Week Renewal videos. Today is Friday of Holy Week, and so we'll talk about what happened on this day. But before we do, we have to remember what happened way, all the way back in the beginning. Do you remember how God created a wonderful world and the first two people to live in it? Adam and Eve? And he gave them everything to enjoy, but said, don't eat the fruit of this one tree. And unfortunately, they chose their own way, and they wanted to be in charge. So they took the fruit and they ate it. They actually were lied to or deceived by Satan, who was there in the form of a snake. Do you remember that? And he told them, he asked them, did God really say you couldn't eat this fruit? And they actually believed the serpent instead of God. And they took the fruit and ate it. So just like we talked about before, after that, sin and death and Satan ruled in the world. And people did everything that was right in their own eyes, and they hurt each other. That's why Jesus had to come to rescue us. So, the beginning of the week, we saw how Jesus came into Jerusalem, and he was on a mission to actually crush the head of the serpent, of Satan. He would defeat sin, death, and Satan. And this is how he was going to do it. He was going to go to the cross. So, our story today has something to do with the cross. So Mark is here, and we're going to open up our last egg for this week. So here it is. Okay, this time we're going to take a deep breath before we open it. Here we go. Ready? Okay, let's open it. Oh, I see some very important things in here. Okay? So first, we'll see this little crown, but it's not a golden crown with jewels. It is a little crown with thorns on it. Thorns that were pressed into Jesus's head, and people were making fun of him. But we'll see that in our story. So I'm going to put that on the cross like that. That was Jesus's crown. And then here, just like we have these crosses, here's another cross inside this egg. But this one is made of nails. And this would be the way that they would hang Jesus on this cross. That's pretty sad. So we just have to remember that this was God's plan and that Jesus did this for us. Because we're sinners, just like Adam and Eve from the beginning. We needed rescue, and our King Jesus was willing to die for us to rescue us. Let's read our passage for today. Mark 15, verse 37. And Jesus uttered with a loud cry and breathed his last, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. And when the Roman guard, who was standing and looking at him, saw this, he saw that he breathed his last breath. The guard said, truly, this man was the Son of God.
The snake crusher is crushed for us. Mark 15. Jesus knew that he was going to die and that it was going to be no ordinary death. We call the day he died Good Friday, and it was good, very good, amazingly good. We would say it was unbelievably good, except that it happened, and, start over. That didn't make sense to me. Oh, I see what he's saying there. Okay, ready? The snake crusher is crushed for us. Mark 15. Jesus knew that he was going to die and that it was going to be no ordinary death. We call the day he died Good Friday, and it was good, very good, amazingly good. We would say it was unbelievably good, except that it did happen, and we should believe it. Jesus suffered so that we can be set free. Jesus died so that we can live forever. Jesus was the good shepherd laying down his life for his sheep. That's why we call it Good Friday. But for anyone who loved Jesus, that Friday seemed anything but good. It must have seemed to disciples like Sad Friday, or Tragic Friday, or the worst Friday in the history of the world. As soon as it was morning, the Jewish leaders bound Jesus and delivered him to Pilate. Pilate was the Roman ruler in that region. He was the one who would decide whether Jesus lived or died, even though he could only do what God had already planned for him to do. Pilate wasn't convinced Jesus had done anything wrong. He wanted to release Jesus and be done with him. But Pilate was more concerned about people liking him than doing the right thing, so he gave the crowd in Jerusalem an option. I will release one prisoner, a murderer named Barabbas, or the king of the Jews named Jesus. Who should I release? They chose Barabbas instead of Jesus. Then what should I do with Jesus? Pilate asked. Crucify him, they shouted. So the soldiers took Jesus and led him away. They clothed him in a purple robe and gave him a crown of thorns. They pretended to worship Jesus, but it was all a joke to them. They struck him on the head and spit on him. If you could have seen Jesus being led to his death that afternoon, everything would have looked upside down. Here was the maker of all things, too weak to even carry his cross. Here was the loving king, killed between two thieves. Here was God's beloved Son, mocked and mistreated by anyone and everyone. But there he was, Jesus the Christ, hanging from a cross. The sky went black because it was a day of judgment, and Jesus cried out to heaven for help. But this was a time to feel the curse of the law, not the smile of God. Jesus had become sin for us. He breathed his last, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. The disciples were scared and confused. The world was dark and sad. Everything seemed wrong. But one Roman soldier at the foot of the cross got it right. Truly, he said, this man was the Son of God. If Jesus was the Son of God, maybe the breath that he breathed was not the last word from Jesus. Our prayer for today. Dear Jesus, we thank you for your sacrifice on the cross. You faced God's frown for sinners like us. Amen.
Okay, now it's time to put the last piece of our resurrection garden together. Did you find a larger stone? This is my large stone, and it should fit nicely over the tomb. So, remember those religious leaders who really didn't like Jesus and wanted him to be killed? Well, there was one religious leader called Joseph. His name was Joseph of Arimathea. And he had a tomb that no one had ever used, no one had ever laid in. And he actually took the body of Jesus and cared for it. He prepared it for burial. And he put Jesus' body in his own tomb. So Jesus went into the tomb and they rolled that stone over the tomb so we can put our stone in front of the opening of our tomb. And now we're going to wait. And when Sunday morning comes, you know what to do. We'll take our stone off, and then we'll keep our garden all summer long so that we can remember every day that Jesus is alive.